is doing the dirty version, so to speak. So the comparison I'm making here is when it comes to those needs that for extroversion, for instance, for an intuitive extrovert, like an ENTJ, just to give an example, you could sort of have dirty extroversion, which is like you're interacting with people to get that need met, but you're really not enjoying it that much. It's just sort of like, well, I need to be around people, so I'm sort of feeding myself, but it's sort of junk food. It's the junk food version of it.
Right.
Versus when you're having these really intellectually stimulating conversations with people where all these subjects that you really enjoy are getting brought up and you're really, really enjoying it. And then it's like the clean version. It's like it's the high energy version of extroversion where you're really feeling like you're being fed and as opposed to just sort of sustaining yourself.
So what we could do, Jeff, is if I took a clip of you using that analogy and I was to put it in type groups, type Jeff, they would probably type you as ENFP. Oh, he's using extroverted intuition with that comparison.
Well, and it's funny because Head in the Clouds brought up Eric Thor, and he posted this thing in one of the, I think in Personality Enthusiasts, where he said, again, typing people by functions, and he had, or function pairs, and he had, this sort of, I guess, attempt to, like, here's how this practically plays out in these combos. And when I read those descriptions, the one that I most related to as being the thing that I most enjoy was about like meeting new people and hearing unique perspectives, which he described as being a combination of extroverted intuition and introverted feeling. So if you used that, then according to that, I would be an ENFP by those factors, or I guess more accurately, I would be an NEFI.
What I will say is a lot of the MBTI people, if they're into Enneagram as well, they notice the limitations of MBTI and would be to say, but hang on a minute, because I would say if you told that to somebody who knew MBTI, they didn't know Kersey, but they knew Enneagram, they could say, hang on a minute, sevens are interested in different perspectives and stuff. So that can apply to ESFP as well.
And so what I said in response to that was, I was honest about this is the one I relate to most, but I don't think that me being into meeting new people who present unique perspectives specifically indicates intuition, especially not on my part. It doesn't even on their part, really, because unique perspectives doesn't necessarily mean intuition. But even if you said that did, then me being interested in people who do that doesn't mean I'm one of those people. So that's sort of the fallacy of thinking that anyone who's interested in a thing, it's because they themselves are like that. When in reality, you often have people attracted to the opposites of things that they express. It's not always people that are alike. And yeah, you mentioned the Enneagram. I was thinking about that earlier when I was saying, that the Jungian functions as sort of a supplement to point out differences, including differences among people of the same type. And Enneagram is another thing that can be used for that, where you say, here's what, and for instance, of course, my type ESFP, you have another ESFP that's a different Enneagram type, and they're going to act very differently on the surface than I might, because yes, they have the same values and orientations from a temperament standpoint, same preferences from a Myers-Briggs standpoint, but they have these other core fears, because that's really, I think, the area where the Enneagram touches on that the other ones kind of ignore is the fear aspect, which is important. And thus you can have a very different expression of that. And I've said before, daytime soap operas, because they have so much dialogue and so much characterization, regardless of whether you think the plots are silly, they have a lot of good character examples where you can see people of the same type with different Enneagrams, and in terms of how their behavior plays out. And so because of that, it's fun. It was fun to me to look at characters on the show One Life to Live, because I could think of like 4 ESFP characters on that show that 3 out of the 4 probably had different Enneagram types, and because when I looked at those aspects, I'm like, yeah, I can see like this one is an ESFP that's a type 3, this one is a type 7, this one's a type 2, and this one's probably a type maybe a 4, and so it's really interesting to look at those differences if you want to get into it. But again, it's sort of like I hesitate to say next level because it makes it sound like it's like some sort of intellectual flexing or something like that, which I don't like. But it's more like just sort of beyond the stuff that's actually for actually determining type. It's just sort of these sometimes interesting elements to talk about in characters and things like that. And you brought up the homicide characters. Yeah. That was something, again, where I didn't understand that. There would have been a time where I would have said the opposite, and I did, because I related so much to Frank that I sort of classified as both as being ISFPs, and turns out I was wrong about both of us. And the more that I paid attention, the more I realized it's a very good example that Meldrick is even if you looked at it from just the function standpoint, and you said, okay, you're looking for signs of the introverted feeling, like you obviously see them from Frank, but Meldrick is the one that goes so far as to his personal crusade that he goes on, basically to bring down the Mahoney organization, and not even just in a way where he's trying to get revenge on them, but he's trying to end the conflict, because in his value system, he looks at it as, look, I may have taken this action and I was part of the death of this guy. He was a bad guy. I view him as this guy that we're better off without him, but here's sort of this havoc that's been wreaked because of that occurrence. And so meanwhile, I can step outside of the bounds of the law, because that's my SP standing, whereas I'm going to go against the authority, but I'm doing it for a value reason. It's not because I feel like messing with them. It's because I'm trying to actually bring about a positive outcome here. It's important enough to me to accomplish this. It's not just I'm playing around with them because I can.
Yeah, and it's a specific instance as well. It's not an abstract ethical thing.
And you see, and that's the consistency in his character. That was like, what, 6th season, I think, when that was happening. And you go 4 years back to the 2nd season, when they had the episode about the guy who had his son shoot him, basically the assisted suicide. And Meldrick says to Felton, "You go when it's your time to go. Anything else is homicide." I mean, that right there, I think most people would put in this category that we've got on our screen of the FI statement. He's expressing his internal value system in a very emphatic way. Whereas, again, with Frank, you get it, but you have the importance is lesser, because you have him saying things like, why he stayed as a homicide cop, why that was the thing he could do, was because of that rush he got from nailing a suspect in the box.
Yep.
So that the performance aspect and the thrill of that experience was more important to me. He didn't say, "Oh, I had to do this because I had to put bad guys behind bars. I had to, I wanted to be a cop because I just had to, improve the neighborhood, or I had to bring down the." It wasn't about that. It was about his personal thrill he got from this. And the other aspect was sort of a side effect of that. So it was a complement to it, but it wasn't the primary reason.
Also, one of the things, there's some cultural things with Frank and Meldrick. Meldrick came from the community, and he spoke in, how shall I put this, African American vernacular English. And and I think Jeff said that in real life, the actual actors sounded a bit more American than their standard. But he came from the community, whereas Frank was from New York, and he was very well educated. He was educated by Jesuits and knew Latin and Greek. And I got this sort of idea that he sort of operated in the higher echelons of the rich black society in Baltimore. And
Yeah,
so,
and they brought that out in the sixth season episodes about the snack food guy played by James Earl Jones.
yeah,
That Frank was sort of biased in taking his side because he was this successful black man that he viewed as being this pillar of the community. So he wanted to support that versus the thug element, you would say, of that he saw that he dealt with on a regular basis as a cop. So he had a natural bias in that direction. Um, and that there was other episodes where specifically where Frank and Lewis were working together where they talked about that aspect where there was the one where the bullet had come from above and had killed somebody, and Frank assumed it came from the hood basically, and Lewis was like, well, wait a minute, why are you assuming it had to come from there,
yeah.
And
Also,
so
yeah,
yeah, they had that conflict, and that was directly out of the book because the real cop that Pendleton was based on, there was sort of a detachment they talked about where the other cops thought he looked at him as thinking he was better than them.
yeah.
And it was funny because in the first episode, they mentioned one of the lines directly out of the book. Felton says he thinks he's better than us because he listens to Emmylou Harris.
Jeff, do you want the certain Beatles song sort of come to mind?